It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 16th edition of School of Tomorrow events, Guardians of the Future, Shaping Tomorrow with Generative AI. The non-profit SOT event series was launched by Beacon House in 2000 to engage global communities in conversations that shape the future of schools and societies. I would like to thank Google for Education, the lead sponsor for SOT 2023, and their partner TechValley, our titanium sponsor UBL. Other sponsors include My Backpack, MK Books, Elite Bank Limited, Habib Bank Limited, Bateen, and Interwood. We also thank our SOT supporters, including Paramount Books and Nestle Pure Life, who have contributed to this year's event. My name is Sadia Chand, and I'm branch head at Beacon House F74 campus. Please take a moment to note these important housekeeping points. Please ensure your cell phones are silent. In case of emergency, the exit point is at the back. Always stay calm and follow directions. Please use the SOT app to scan the QR code for Q&A and feedback. Share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Guardians of the Future and hashtag SOT 2023. If you need assistance, our ushers are here to help. For questions, please either use the flashcards provided by the ushers or use the mobile phone. This panel discussion will last for about 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of quick question and answers. Now I'd like to introduce the moderator of the session, Ms. Iram Naqvi. Ms. Iram Naqvi has a background in counseling, psychology, and mental health neuroscience. She excels in in-person and online therapy. Her experience covers education with leadership roles in student guidance, counseling, and management in various settings. She initiated a student well-being program at Beacon House School System, providing teacher training and parent awareness sessions. Her blend of academic expertise and practical experience uniquely equips her to tackle academic environmental challenges. Ms. Naqvi, you're please welcome on the stage.
Thank you for being here at the end of the day on the graveyard shift, and I hope we'll keep you entertained for this session. So I'd like to introduce my panel. Welcome to all my panelists, and I guess I'll go according to where we are seated. So Phil Muscat, with over 2 decades in the educational sector, Philip is the current director of curriculum at We Learn Academy, Thailand, a trailblazer in project-based learning and educational consultancy. A seasoned mentor to coaches, Philip is also an established thought leader with a co-authored book on mindfulness in education and numerous articles on innovative pedagogies like PBL and e-learning. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Ambar Shamsi. Ambar Shamsi is Director, Center for Excellence in Journalism at the Institute of Business Administration. Ms. Shamsi is an award-winning multimedia journalist, political commentator, and free speech advocate with a wide-ranging experience in television, radio, online, and the print media. Welcome, Ambar. Thank you. Maha Chishti. Maha is lawyer and founder of Manush, an organization working for the rights of the most marginalized community, the Khwaja Siras, providing them with vocational skills to keep them off the streets and indulge them in a more conducive environment for a better tomorrow. Welcome, Maha.
Thank you so much.
Taimur Malik. Taimur is a senior partner at Kalam Law, a legal 500 ranked firm in Pakistan, and was called to the bar from the Honorable Society of Lincoln's Inn and has an MBA from Oxford University. He is also the founder of Pakistan's multi-dimensional law and justice initiative, quotingthelaw.com, and has initiated many technologies enabled access to justice initiatives. Welcome, Taimur.
Thank you.
Julaikas, who's joining us online. Julaikas, Director of Education, is a leader in education with a career that spans almost 3 decades, with a background that stretches from early childhood to higher education. Her dedication to project-based learning and learner-centered initiatives has been at the heart of her work. Welcome, Jill. Glad to have you here. So I'd like to begin by asking all of you, how do you personally define inclusivity, and why is it important in our current political, socio-economic context? Anybody can start, whoever wants to take the question.
I mean, it can be the journalist or the lawyer. So,
Well, I mean, does that mean that I'm supposed to start? Was that the hint?
look,
I mean, lawyers love talking, so why don't you open it up?
So I think inclusivity is key to everything these days, and we can talk about inclusivity in different ways. I think in the context of today's discussion, inclusivity is about including people from diverse backgrounds in a debate, in the media profession, or giving them an equal platform for voicing their concerns. But at the same time, as a lawyer, I feel inclusivity in the justice system is key, and it's very important. And that's something that I'm very passionate about, that the justice system in Pakistan clearly works for the haves and doesn't even exist at times for the have-nots. What we are seeing at the moment in Pakistan, if we talk about that from an inclusivity perspective, I think that also is just something that's hitting close to home in many of our cases. But for an ordinary Pakistani, that issue has been around forever. And in that respect, inclusivity means improving access to justice. But before you can improve access to justice, you need to improve knowledge of what justice is. In most cases, people don't know what laws exist at the moment. Ignorance of law, they say, is no excuse. But first, the public has to come to know what is beyond just a traffic challan or something, what is right and what is wrong. So our laws as a country, as most of you would know, are in English language. Our superior court system, the official language of the courts is English. So how do you expect a normal, ordinary Pakistani to be an equal participant in the justice system in Pakistan? So inclusivity from a legal point of view, I feel, is a key topic that needs more discussion and debate.
I guess it's my turn now. We had the lawyer. It's now the turn for the journalist. Obviously, I'm coming from a media perspective. I'm not an academic. I'm a practitioner. And I'd like to for me, inclusivity is from the perspective of working in newsrooms, as an editor, as somebody who really strongly believes in allowing for diverse voices to be on the media. And if we go back to what the purpose or mission for the media ought to be, the media obviously holds powerful people to account, but it also exerts pressure as a pressure group on certain key issues. So therefore, if there is diversity in newsrooms, if newsrooms are more inclusive of all kinds of people whose voices need to be represented, and that's reflected outwardly, in a public-facing way, on screen, in television, in radio, as well as newspapers. Certain key issues that may be underrepresented or may not have the attention of policymakers would probably get more attention. And I think it really begins, as I said, for me, the key is the newsroom, because I've worked in newsrooms that have not been inclusive or have not been diverse. And I've seen the difference where there have been newsrooms that have been more inclusive. As an example, I worked in the mainstream media, which I think is absolutely criminal how the voices and representation is not diverse enough. Just as a quick example, there are only 2 female bureau chiefs across Pakistan for television channels. There are over 50, 60 television news channels. There's only 2 bureau chiefs in 2 stations, one in Quetta and one in Peshawar. Which there's also only about 5 to 10% female media practitioners registered with press clubs within Pakistan. I'm not talking about freelancers or contract employees. That's also criminal, because that means you don't have enough women on the media, I'm not talking about, and the kind of quality of representation in the media as well. So how many women are reporters, how many women are on the assignment desk, how many women, for example, are in media management positions. As I said, only 2 bureau chiefs, not a single news director or current affairs director. And that's also reflected, I think, then the outcome of that is reflected in the kinds of issues that get picked up in the media. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from in terms of how it's represented. And then I think I'd also like to speak about the pressures or the reasons why you don't have more diverse voices on the media, and why the media isn't more inclusive. The media, obviously, we can't sort of categorize it as a monolith in the sense that when we think of the media, we tend to think of TV news channels or the mainstream. Obviously, the media is more diverse in itself as well. So there are smaller independent digital news platforms, there's newspapers, there's radio, there's state-owned television, state-owned media outlets as well, and then there's more commercial television media organizations. So there's obviously diversity as well. But we think of the media as mainstream television channels, which is why I'm focusing on that in particular. The outcome is that there are many people who feel that their voices are not projected in the media, they're not represented in the media, and because of that, they will obviously turn to other sources of info, they will obviously turn to other outlets that may not have the gatekeeping abilities that are present in the media. And social media is an example of that, which has obviously shown that if you cannot find your voice in the mainstream, you can obviously create pressure through social media. And there's problems and limitations of that, and I hope we talk about that as well. So inclusivity is extremely important if we want policymakers to pay attention to issues that are diverse, that are important, particularly, and I'm going to end with this, in countries like Pakistan, in any country really, but just taking Pakistan as an example, which is multi-ethnic as well as multilinguistic, which is why our system of government, for instance, is parliamentary, because it's meant to sort of obviously provide voice, particularly if we talk about the Senate, which is the upper house of parliament as well, which is meant to represent all voices or find policy at all policy levels. Reality is very different, but I mean, I'm just talking about how, the purpose of this and why the media, because it does not provide that kind of representation. I don't think the media is inclusive, nor is it diverse. And that has its own set of problems.
Thanks for that, Amber. Philip, would you like to go next?
Sure. So the question was, what does inclusion mean to me? And I think I don't know. And I think that the more I've thought about this over the last few days, there's been far more questions than answers actually in my own mind. And more questions are coming up as I hear my esteemed colleagues speak. So, Tamer, a couple of questions came up. Because you spoke about access to justice, okay, and that not being inclusive. But then I actually thought the concept of justice clearly is not the same amongst all groups. So actually, isn't that almost a self-defeating argument that who gets to choose which kind of justice is the one that prevails, or do you believe that that is some kind of objective kind of morally good form of justice? And you also talked about right and wrong. They might not know the difference between right and wrong. But who's right or wrong? Who gets to decide that? And then isn't trying to kind of get people access to that, of the same kind of systems of laws, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't that actually anti-inclusive in some sense?
So, I mean, if I can very briefly answer that, I think it's important to understand, we often say that the judge is not there to provide justice in the, as you may think in the form of equity. The judges in Pakistan and in most other common law countries have to implement the law as has been passed by the parliament. So when we talk about justice, let's say in our context, it's about, is the law as it is in the country today, whether it's right or wrong, whether it's moral or immoral, ethical or not, is another debate. But the way the law is today, is it being implemented properly? The people who have grievances against a particular matter or law, do they have access to justice, to the courts? in an efficient, economical way, and are the judges applying it in the manner that they should? So therefore, I would view inclusivity in that context, in the framework that we have. I don't agree with many of the laws, but as I said, that's another debate. So
Thank you for clarifying that. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Maha, would you like to?
So I work with the Khwaja community, and speaking of the Khwaja community, they are the most marginalized, in my opinion, at least in Pakistan. When it comes to marginalized identities, they are most likely to have their voices be dismissed, disrespected, and demobilized. Now, what happens with that is that they're very easily stereotyped and tabooed. So when we speak of the Khwaja community, we can say that, oh, they're just sex workers, or we could say that they're just into illicit activities, drug traffickers, and that's where it stops. You do not discuss further about this topic. What happens because of this is that stereotypes have that problem that they only bring half a story, only a small part of that story forth. To bring the other side of the story to the masses, you have to become that voice of change. And that's something that I've done through my organization, that I've tried to become that voice of change for the Khwaja community. At least that's the first step. The second would be educating them about their rights and then employment and so on and so forth. To bring them to the mainstream and to understand the problems and the social issues that they face, the first step would be to become that voice and then to advocate that voice so the masses can understand and be empathetic towards their issues, and then social conditioning as well, because for decades the social conditioning has been that this is a Khwaja community, you are not to associate with them, their problems are not really problems. So to change that narrative and that perspective, that is what inclusivity means to me.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Jill, would you like to take that question now?
It's intense to follow such a beautiful response. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that social change and bringing their half of the story. For someone who works in education, spends their time in physical environments around the world, I think inclusivity, as your question was, how do you personally define that? For me, it is a diverse demographic connected with cognitive diversity. Understanding that every student's voice, yes, it's our job to lift it out, but also to support in a physical environment the diversity of cognitive, of developmental, of human rights, bringing that diversity forward, and to me defines inclusivity, creating a space that's spatially proficient in our culture, within our society, so any voice, any background, any demographic has the opportunity, regardless of their cognitive diversity, to share what that voice means within that forum, whatever that forum is. And I think when we talk about inclusivity, it's about really thinking not only demographic diversity, but cognitive diversity. Because as, and forgive me if I can't recall her name exactly, so I don't want to mess it up, but in the sense of, if I'm a sex worker, if I'm a drug trafficker, if I'm a student, a child who comes from an environment that is not cognitively seen as the level that we expect for what we call smart or intelligent, we automatically diminish that voice. And what does that look like, feel like, and sound like when a child enters any kind of environment or an adult? And I think we have to start to look at not only inclusivity around demographics, but also cognitive inclusivity.
Thanks for that, Jill. So building on what Jill said, and I think what all of us have maybe talked about, is that I think education is key in this, that you educate, like you said, for law, people don't even know perhaps the line between what is wrong and what is right. If media is not giving voice to the diversity that exists in society, is it because of lack of education? So how do we make this a level playing field? What are the roles that the legal system can play, the media can play, education can play in making this a more level playing field for everybody?
So, I mean, if I can start from the legal perspective, I think inclusivity is also about increasing gender and other representations in the profession. We didn't have a female judge of the Supreme Court till last year. Right? Even now, the number of judges in our superior courts is in single digits, the female judges. So a lot more needs to be done to make the profession and the justice system overall more inclusive. In terms of creating awareness, I think one of the breakthrough mediums has been TikTok for Pakistan in many respects. The platform perhaps is not being used for educational purposes, but it's an example of how a medium can be used to increase awareness even on important issues and important topics. We often see, and perhaps my platforms are guilty of that as well, that we create content in English or sometimes in Urdu around important topics and subjects. That's only reaching a certain segment of the society. So if you have to really target the tens of millions who are following people unknown to the crowd in this room on TikTok, I think you need to use different mediums, different languages, and convey the message. There is an eagerness to learn that we know through various campaigns that have been done in Pakistan over the years. And it's a matter of getting that across. And with that, I link it to media, and perhaps Amber can pick on that, is that we have become a talk show country in the sense that the prime time hours are devoted to political talk shows. Not even talk shows on reform, development, manifesto discussion or anything. It's just the same gibberish, on all the shows. Why aren't we doing responsible journalism and media by devoting some of that prime time to educational content? And some of that could, of course, in my view, should be on legal issues. Educate the masses. And it's not always about just political cases. I mean, I do political cases as well, but it shouldn't be about that. 99% of the cases in the courts are about inheritance, family disputes, tenancy issues, agricultural land disputes, and so on, contract enforcement. People need to be made aware about rights and responsibilities in respect of those issues. That's what I would say.
Amber, would you like to take it?
Yeah, I get that a lot. Why is the media so irresponsible? Why doesn't it, raise awareness of lots of issues, diverse issues, because we're talking about diversity and inclusivity. There are obviously a few reasons, and I feel like I always have to be a bit defensive and explain the media, even though I'm a huge critic of the way that the mainstream media, I want to re-emphasize, the mainstream media, I would say, behaves. So the media is primarily commercial. Let's understand this. It needs to make money. And that's one of the sort of contradictions. Media or news outlets actually provide a public good. They provide public information. But at the same time, that public information, that public good is paid for by somebody. It's paid for by advertisers. How those advertisers go to certain media outlets is measured through rating systems. And if you were talking about TikTok, based on the views that people have on TikTok, on YouTube. So if 50,000 people are watching an anchor or a commentator who's talking about one particular political party, spreading disinformation, misinformation, and it's getting a lot of views, obviously that will encourage that particular YouTuber, for instance, or TikToker to create more content along the same lines. And that's replicated across media organizations. If talk shows are a very popular format and more people are watching them, there will be more advertisements. Therefore, it is a vicious cycle. I will say around, I think 10, 15 years ago, there was more diversity in terms of programming on the media. But because of state policies, I haven't even spoken about censorship yet, because that actually influences the diversity and inclusivity that you see on screen, or at least what you read and hear. But that's one more factor. But I will say that about 10, 15 years ago, that diversity in program eventually, because audiences were not interested, They were not interested. They were watching these political talk shows. That's why you see less diversity in terms of programming. And somebody obviously has to be willing to take that risk in order to increase, maybe as you said, more programs about awareness, about issues that are beyond political issues, issues of education, of transgender rights, for instance, and what formats work and why are audiences watching them. Media organizations actually do conduct surveys in-house that are not publicly available. I've seen them, that assess which talk shows are more popular, which guests are more popular, and that's what determines eventually what you see on screen. But there's not enough interest or work being done, and I would suggest this. I joined the Center for Excellence in Journalism at the IBA University about 1.5 years ago, and I feel like more academics and media-focused universities, educational institutions need to understand, make that connection between the industry and its issues and problems, as well as public interest journalism. How do we improve viewership, audiences for public interest journalism? That's a study worth doing to understand, to sort of break this code, to sort of break this vicious cycle. I hope that serves as an adequate example. Obviously, I could go on and on about this.
No, that was a good example. I would also like to talk about, so we're talking about educating through TikTok, through social media, or through the media itself, traditional media. How is it that we can change it through curricula in schools? Philip, Jill, whoever.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think, because let's bring it back to some of these driving questions.
Sure.
I think. So, how do global educational paradigms and local cultural narratives interact? Mm-hmm. And what challenges arise in maintaining the uniqueness of local identities while integrating into the broader frameworks? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really good question. Okay, I think it's so important to include both local and global issues in any curricula these days. So the phrase has been coined many different ways, but it's something along the lines of local citizens with global perspectives is probably the most desirable kind of outcome that we're looking at. So I think that we can have those global competency skills, but then when we're actually looking at actionable projects, we can start at the local level because they're more accessible, they're more realistic.
And they're contextualized, which is very important.
Absolutely right. So I do think that you get the best of both worlds there and the mix that we're looking for. I think that it's really important to have multiple perspectives on all issues. And this is something that I'm quite passionate about, actually, and it's quite controversial, I think, to say that for the most part, education should be valueless. What I mean by that is that the only values that an educational organization should have are epistemic values, okay? And in terms of views, worldview on anything else, I think that should be let up to the learner to decide. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's many reasons for that as well. And look, character education simply doesn't work. There is no debate objectivism versus constructivism debate. I mean, that's over, it's dead. There's no way that teachers actually transmit knowledge into students in any meaningful way. Everyone, gains their own understandings from their own experience mm-hmm. with the world. So you could tell, educators, be kind. Yeah. Well, I don't think they even know what that means, to be honest with you. But you can tell a learner to be kind, and they might be able to parrot that for 15 years of their schooling, but it doesn't mean that they believe it to be right. So I espouse Dewey's moral deliberation in that sense, and it's not new, it's over 100 years old, which any topic, as controversial as you like, your starting point in a school, in an educational situation should be zero. That's what I espouse, and I'll be happy to elaborate?
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Okay, so any issue that has, moral and ethical implications, which actually, if you think about it, are most, going into that classroom and not trying to take a position that a certain group was right or wrong, or a certain action was desirable or not desirable, that should always be left up to the deliberation of the learner.
Okay, that makes sense. But perhaps so at what age are you proposing that kind of education take place? Because I don't think it would work well in the early years, or you think it works well in the early years as well?
It absolutely does work well in the early years, but of course then it's contextual in the same way that you're not going to try and get an early years learner to find a cure for cancer, okay? But in the same way that you're not going to get them to be thinking about global kind of maybe conflict and things like that, but they may have a view about some kind of conflict that's happening in their home or happening in their own classroom. But moral deliberation is still the way to go, not telling. Because, again, if you're just actioning rewards and punishment, but behaviorism, which works pretty well for rats and pigeons, but not so much for humans. A learner's, behavior is not changed because they want to change it. They're not changing that behavior because they believe it to be right. Okay, they're changing it because they want to avoid the punishment or receive the reward.
Or they want to conform.
Right, but I think the way again is to build that understanding through deliberation.
Jill, sorry.
Yeah, please.
Jill, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I think too, to add to what you're saying, if we look at the cognitive experience of educators and the way that we design the structures, not the physical structures, the actual concept, the construct of school, we have to start to experience or expand beyond what we consider a teacher's knowledge to be educationally inclusive of the school building, excluding experts, which then change the actual diversity and understanding and depth of what a teacher is able to provide based upon their own experience. Therefore, if we look at multiple perspectives in education through whether you call it project-based learning, experiential learning, if we don't provide the educators the opportunity to change their own cognitive development as they go through the profession of educating, meaning they should be partnering with lawyers, they should be partnering with journalists so that they have a depth of understanding in order to provide, I find it very interesting, a value list so that their values aren't pushing or projecting within the educational environment. Therefore, you have the ability to bring in culturally diverse experiences for those students to start to shape the way that they are coming up with a conclusion. And to put that in simple terms, if teachers don't have the experience beyond the curricula, which is a very narrow perspective of content being delivered, if we don't provide those multiple perspectives by giving teachers the experiences beyond the school and traditional training, we're never going to actually give entry points to those other experiences because other identities are not allowed across the threshold of a classroom because teachers still own 90% of that space. And until we decide that students truly own the creativity of the spaces they inhabit, then are we truly creating inclusive learning environments that actually give students the opportunity to understand, and going back to what the lawyer said, just some of the experiences even of contract law. I thought that was beautiful. Whether you're a kindergarten student or whether you're an adult, contract law and the way it's perceived and delivered, whatever social media or journalism opportunity is provided, how are we providing our students with equitable access to these different kinds of legal perspectives that we know need a variety of different mediums. And to me, that means we have to look at the ways in which we're providing educator education to really move to that altruistic, valueless piece that Philip was referring to, which I thought was beautiful, Philip, to really bring about student values within that classroom. So I think it's about changing the threshold of what we call innovative or inclusive education in Pakistan, in the US, in all of the countries that we're fortunate enough to be able to move through. How do we start to look at the perspective of an educator and really start to change the dynamics of how an educator connects with a journalist to understand the issues of the mediums that we're using to portray events that students, that we want them to experience the real world. I hope that made sense.
Yes,
I got
it
a little
does. Yes, it
excited.
absolutely does. Thank you for that, Jill.
I don't know how many have noticed that we are in the backdrop of a very complex and interesting South Can painting.
Yes,
in the backdrop.
It's gorgeous, yes.
So if I can just read what's written on top, it says, "Aina-e ayyam mein aaj apni ada dekh, mashriq se ubharte hue suraj ko zara dekh." So the sun is still rising from the east. It hasn't risen yet. So we still need to look towards the west. So it's great that this panel discussion and the other discussions have a view from the west, so to speak. And perhaps, we don't need to reinvent the wheel on all these issues. We have to take whatever has worked and adapt to our cultural and local requirements and make the most of it.
That's absolutely true. But I think what Jill was saying and what Philip is perhaps saying is also that when you're talking about valueless education or having giving children the agency, giving the learner the agency to decide and to debate and discuss is as old as Socrates, right? Because that's basically what he did, was ask why about everything. So, and so when we talk about inclusion, then we have to ask, why are we not inclusive? Why are we having this debate on this forum that at this stage and juncture of our lives, why in all the ways that we have evolved, and we are now talking about generative AI, we are not able to do something as basic and simple as being inclusive. Anybody?
So when it comes to social media and inclusion, when I started my organization, it was actually through Instagram that we came on the map, where people could say that, oh, there is an organization working for the rights of the Quadriceps community. When it comes to social media, yes, it did give us the boom that we needed. It gave us a lot of recognition. But with it came a lot of ignorance as well, because whilst we are demonstrating the capabilities and creativity of the Quadriceps community, a lot of people are very ignorant of the cause of that we're working for. A lot of people will purchase the product from us without understanding who made them, why did they make them, why are we employing them. So whilst I would say that it did bring about some social awareness that we wanted to bring about, the lack of education of the Quadriceps community played a vital role in them not understanding the cause, the reason behind the organization. You know, at a very early age in schools, if we're not taught about the marginalized communities, how are we to, if we're 30 years old sitting on social media, scrolling through our Instagram, we're just going to see a reel because it's bright and shiny and sparkling. It's just a trending reel, and you'll just surpass it. You won't think more of it. So how is that to make an impact, right? Everything on social media in today's world has become a hashtag activism. Anything that's trending. Today it's trending, tomorrow it's not. So how does it make that impact? I remember during COVID, this new narrative had come about that COVID is spreading about specifically through the Quadriceps community because they are still on the streets and they're roaming around and about, so you should stay away from them. I remember people were getting products from us, and months later we would ask them, oh, if you've placed this tray on your table, please do send us a picture. We'd really like to post it on our page. And they would say, we've obviously still not opened it. Why? posts made by Khwaja Siraz and COVID. So do you see that stereotypical nature and that thinking and the lack of understanding that you can't dehumanize a person. You are to give them those rights. I don't think that a pet at home would be treated the same way. And they are human beings, right? So the lack of empathy and humanity, I don't think that social media can really bridge that gap. Yes, you could become a trending hashtag one day, but tomorrow you'll be forgotten. So that's something, I don't think that we can strike that balance there.
I think for that, we need people, champions like her, who focus on a particular issue and then stick to it as well.
Yes.
And don't just move on with the social media trends. But for me, as a lawyer or as a part of the justice system, when do you think in Pakistan can we see a Khwaja Sira as a judge of the High Court? Right? Even suggesting this, to my friends in the judiciary would perhaps sound comical, unfortunately. But that's where we have to head to. Inclusiveness should not just mean gender equality or gender representation on the bench, but really it has to be inclusive in all respects. And I think the first step is what she's doing. I think you just have to talk about it. You have to promote champions of a particular cause and take it from there. Make it a normal situation to have that discussion.
I'd like to say something. When we come to law, I feel like it's also caused quite a stir when it comes to the Khwaja Sira community, because initially, they were defined under this umbrella term being transgenders. Now suddenly this new term has come about, which is khunsa, nothing that I've heard of before, because Khwaja Sira is the most oldest term to define this community. And now when obviously I am an advocate for their rights, the first question that I'm asked in this post-Mariabi world is it an intersex person? Is it a transgender person? Is it a khunsa? Is it a Khwaja Sira? So would you like to speak on the laws regarding...
Well, I would like to just comment on what you've just said. You didn't explain to us in the beginning why you were referring to them as Khwaja Sira and not as transgenders, right? But I think many would have subconsciously picked up on the fact that in an English conversation, she was using the term Khwaja Sira. So I think that's why continuing to speak about something and educating the masses and the public is very important. The laws, of course, the laws have to change. Laws are not perfect. Laws are clubbing things together. My eldest son is on the autism spectrum. Every few months, my wife tells me what's the most appropriate way of referring to our son. That we have an autistic child, or we have a child on the spectrum, or we have a special needs or a differently abled child. So I think, terms are fine, but it's really their identity is important.
100%.
And the laws around it, again, need to be changed. But who gives them voice? It's again going to be people like you for the Khwaja Sira, or for other communities, somebody else who's really going to give that voice to the marginalized. So I think let's just keep having this conversation.
Thank you for sharing that.
I think that's really important, but yes, what Maha is doing is brilliant, but I think we all need to give them voice in all our spaces that we all occupy, because I think we occupy spaces in which we can make people be more sensitive to these things, be more inclusive by having conversations, not just on a panel, but in the places that we are working in, so that it becomes normalized, like you're saying, it has to be normalized.
This is decades of social conditioning. When a Khwaja Sira is abandoned from their household and they're onto the streets, they're in this vicious cycle of the Guru Chela system, right? They are made to believe that they were born to be sex workers or drug traffickers, when for the longest time you are made to believe a certain thing, that becomes your reality, right? So it is obviously the responsibility of all of us to be able to change that for them. And coming back to the terms, it is very unfortunate that whilst I use the term Khwaja Sira for them today, the most used term to date is still Khusra, the most derogatory term.
That's true. Yes.
But by the way, one thing, if you're not already doing it or somebody should do, is try to get them legal inheritance rights from their birth families.
Of course.
So that may help change something like that.
Could I just quickly, like a quick intervention here?
Yes.
Because I saw the time.
Yeah.
I saw the time. And I just want to address this because I think it's a great example of why perhaps the media and social media is failing, right? For instance, in terms of a vulnerable group like Khaja Siraz or transgenders, the transgender community. There have been documentaries and coverage of, from the legal aspect to the way their lives are covered. I mean, I used to work for the BBC as a bilingual reporter, and I did a series on Khaja Siraz and how they were physically, there were physical attacks against them in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, for instance. So we all kind of play our role, but it feels a little like it's not enough. And the reason it's not enough, I think, is actually because it really should begin from the educational system.
Yes, I agree.
Because the media is limited, social media has its algorithm and its biases, and it plays into our cognitive biases as well. And because these are both commercial, where the opportunity is actually at the level of education. And seeing, and obviously there's fantastic work that people are doing, seeing Khaja Siraz as human beings in positions of authority, in diverse professions, that matters. But really, it has to begin from the education system.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, we don't see many Khaja Siraz come to school, right? We don't see representation there. If you have a child on the autistic spectrum, it's very difficult to send them to a regular school because you don't have that support that they will be able, that they will have. So we have to actually empower our education system by empowering and educating the teachers, because unless you change the environment in the school by challenging the values and beliefs that we've held for so long, we won't be able to change any of that. So yes, I completely agree with that. So now we're going to the question and answer session part of it. So for Phil and for Jill, how can teachers use EQ to create a more positive and inclusive learning environment?
I think that can be, read in a couple of ways. How can teachers use emotional intelligence? Are we talking about that, or are we talking about imbibing it in our learners? So maybe it's both.
I think it's more like if teachers have good EQ, then how? I think if they have good EQ, actually, they will create a more positive learning environment.
So, okay, yeah. I mean, look, I think the bottom line, and there's a big trend over this past 3 days, actually, with the explosion in artificial intelligence. If that's doing all the donkey work for us, the question is, what does it mean to be human, right? Social and emotional aptitudes, I think, that need to be embedded into all of our curricula. And I think that when you've got these, call them your school-wide learning outcomes or your mastery competencies or whatever, that's for the whole school community, right? That's for the teachers, the administrative staff, the learners as well. And for teachers to model that, yes, of course, that's going to become a more positive and inclusive environment. And then as the learners are constantly exposed to that, they get constant opportunities to practice and get feedback. And by the time they graduate, hopefully they'll be much more empathetic, much more self-aware, and just much better human beings.
Jill, do you think, how do we get teachers to be more, to have a higher EQ?
I think providing multiple opportunities and experiences to connect the types of professional experiences that we see on the stage to us in the classroom. I think to physically change the classroom environment, to physically change the design of schools and campuses so that teachers have a suite of spaces or a kit of parts to completely unmoor from these historical anchors of what school should look like in a real, applicable, everyday. Teachers get rid of borders, get rid of decoration, allow students' identity to shape the physical environment and bring in the identities of people that we are marginalizing, and lift those up. Lift up language and make languages equal. In a Spanish-speaking environment and in my own school, Spanish and English, they are equal and on the same playing level. So cognitive diversity and cognitive perspectives are leveled and equaled. allow students ownership and identity within this space changes the emotional intelligence of teachers by allowing those perspectives and entry points for other cultures to rise above their own and feel a sense of space. Students need to own 90% of that space with a multitude of diversity and equity. And I think that's the applicable word on the street thing that we could do and walk away with, is look at the spaces that we are creating now and make sure that they are inculcated with the level of diversity and experience we need to make sure that students have the opportunity to practice kindness, empathy, and understanding.
Yes, and that will only come if it's modeled for them. It can't be taught, but it can be modeled.
Oh, no, it can be taught.
Empathy can be taught?
Absolutely.
And how would you teach empathy?
Okay, so I'm so disappointed. It's just got very exciting. So a lot of my work revolves around the 16 habits of mind.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone's familiar with those, but they're basically 16 cognitive and social emotional dispositions that successful people have. Mm-hmm. So if you read the portion of my book, small plug there, thank you. I talk about exactly how we can embed listening with understanding and empathy into the curriculum, teach it intentionally, and actually measure it as well. And there are different dimensions of that actually that we can look at. So the first thing is a simple one, the knowledge of what it means. Okay, that's kind of dimension one. Second, the awareness of context where the application of listening with understanding and empathy may have positive outcomes. So that's dimension two. Dimension three is then the ability to actually apply that when needed. Dimension four, to actually realize that there are benefits over these cognitive behaviors and dispositions over others, i.e. anger and jealousy and all of those other things. And then number five is the commitment to actually go on a journey of development and always improve on all of these. And everything can be measured in education. So I hope that answers
Okay, that does answer. Somebody wanted to say something?
Can I just add, too, that I think if you're going to talk about needs and conditions, you have to look at leadership, because if you want to teach and build empathy, teachers have to be in an environment that allows what you just talked about to be nurtured. Mm-hmm. So therefore, we have to have school leaders, school administration, and a society that supports that kind of growth and development. So the needs and conditions that must exist in a classroom must exist in a societal realm in order to empower teachers to be able to do that. So if you're talking about modeling, that has to be multi-tiered. Intervention systems, the same thing that we would do with students. So what does that multi-tiered intervention system look like at the school leadership level and at the school management level?
Yes, thank you for that, Jill.
I know that this is not related to education, but I do want to say that you can rewire people's brains. And then the reason I'm saying that a little bit, and it's coming from a perspective that is the opposite of empathy, hate speech, for instance, which you see a lot of on social media. Let's also understand that one of the purposes of hate speech is to silence people who come from smaller, less powerful groups who may be marginalized, etc., by maybe a group that is more powerful or is more majoritarian. So I was speaking to a neuroscientist who's from Delhi, and this is part of a project I was working on with UNESCO, and they've been experimenting with how to train even older people, not even just young minds, how to retrain their brains in order to be more empathetic, to be more tolerant, to be more inclusive. So it is, I just want to say that it is even possible just to retrain the brain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And by the way, I mean, that definitely is education, because what we talk about now is the convergence of neuroscience, of education and psychology, right? And that comes down to this growth versus fixed mindset, right? That we can always grow, and we can, as you say, rewire our brains to a certain degree. So absolutely, that's
no, to a very large extent. You can rewire your brain to a very large extent.
And until the moment that we pass.
Yes,
Absolutely.
as long as you want to, if you want to be open-minded and want to keep learning. The last question is for you, Maha.
Yes.
In what ways can various organizations be effective in supporting transgender rights and inclusivity?
So when it comes to other organizations, I think they are putting in the work that is required, that is advocacy of their rights on social media and in general. So there is awareness of their rights. And they are trying to create more conducive environments. There are a lot of organizations who have created salons, because a lot of Khwajah they mostly identify themselves as females. So they like to, dress up, take care of themselves, look a certain way. So that is happening. However, the obstacle that comes is that most political authorities, these legal authorities, they become an obstacle. We can all agree that they hold the most power to be able to foster the voices of the marginalized community, right? I'd like to bring in an example. There's this Khwajah, her name is Sana, that we came across. And she shared this experience of hers with us, which was that she was taken to the 6th floor of a building. She was raped by a policeman and then thrown down, due to which she had incurred several injuries, and she was in the hospital for a very long time. So when the people of this country, who are to safeguard the communities and the entire society, when they are indulging in these sorts of things, how are the Khwajah to be able to get their rights, to get that awareness across, and to be able to live peacefully in this community, in the society? I can speak all I want. I can fight with people all I want for their rights. But until or unless these institutions do not join hands with us, unfortunately, we won't be able to bring a change. So the organizations are putting in the work, but it's the masses, it's these authorities, it's this audience that is sitting here to be able to understand what I am advocating and be empathetic towards this cause. That's what's going to bring about the change. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Maha. Thank you to all the panelists. We are out of time. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Jill, for joining us online. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
our
you for you,
moderator.
yes. Without you, this would not be very meaningful.